The desperate situation. Emerges empire. The world was in chaos. Alien ships had darkened the skies for years, and humanity was on the edge of extinction. Earth's once vibrant cities were now ruins. Smoke and dust filled the air, blocking out the sun as alien forces crushed everything in their path. The invaders, known as the Zorathians, were ruthless and merciless. They believed they had nothing to fear from humanity, seeing humans as weak and insignificant. For years, Earth had fought back with all it had. The military tried everything, but their weapons were no match for the Zorathians' advanced technology. Human cities had fallen, one after another. The last remaining forces of humanity were scattered in small underground bunkers and hidden military bases, trying to survive. The world was dying. People were hungry, cold, and desperate. Earth's resources were running low, and the few cities still standing were crumbling under the weight of the alien occupation. Many people had lost hope. There were whispers in the dark corners of the world that humanity's time was up. The aliens believed they had already won, and they were growing overconfident. But deep beneath the Earth's surface, something was happening that no one could have predicted. In a secret bunker, the last leaders of the human resistance had gathered. They sat around a large table, their faces grim but determined. Among them was Commander Sarah Donovan, a seasoned military leader who had seen the horrors of the war firsthand. She had watched as cities burned, her friends fell, and the alien forces grew stronger. "Is this it?" asked one of the engineers, his voice trembling with exhaustion. "Have we really reached the end?" Sarah stood, staring at the holographic map of Earth. She pointed to the areas that were still held by human forces. They were small pockets, like islands in a sea of alien-controlled territory. "We can't give up now. We've lost so much, but we're still here. We have one last chance." The others looked at each other. They knew what she meant. It was the only option left. If they were to have any hope of winning, they would have to do something impossible. The aliens had underestimated humanity, believing that without advanced technology, Earth's forces would never rise again. The Zorathians were wrong. Commander Donovan turned to the group. "We're going to fight back. We're going to build something they'll never expect." There was a silence in the room. The thought was both crazy and brilliant. Could they really build a weapon from nothing? From junk? The plan was simple, but risky. They would use the scraps and remnants of old technology, anything they could find. Old war machines, broken satellites, abandoned ships. Everything had to be repurposed to create a new weapon. They would take what the aliens had left behind, the pieces of human civilization they had destroyed, and use them to build something to turn the tide of war. Some of the engineers were doubtful. How could they build a warship from nothing? And not just any warship, but one that could fight against the highly advanced alien fleet. But Sarah knew that desperation could breed creativity. If humanity could make it to the stars once, they could do it again. Even with scraps, they could build something formidable. "We have no time to waste," Sarah said firmly. "The Zorathians are coming for the last strongholds. We need to act fast." A young engineer, Max, stood up. "If we can make it work, this ship will be unlike anything they've seen. But we need to move quickly. The aliens are getting closer every day." Sarah nodded. "We'll make it work. We don't need fancy technology. We need willpower and creativity." In the weeks that followed, the survivors began collecting everything they could. Old warships, scrap metal from abandoned factories, broken down vehicles, and anything that could be repurposed. It wasn't much, but it was something. The human team worked day and night, forging bonds and pushing through exhaustion. With every piece of metal they welded, with every part they connected, the hope of victory began to grow. But even as the warship started to take shape, the weight of what they were doing settled heavily on their shoulders. The task was enormous, and the risks were high. They had no idea if their efforts would even result in something that could fly, let alone fight the alien fleet. But Commander Donovan believed in them. She knew that humanity had always survived against the odds. Even when it seemed impossible, humans found a way to fight back. "We're not giving up," she said to the crew. "This warship might be made of scraps, but it's going to carry our hopes. We can win this. We can make them regret ever underestimating us." As the team worked tirelessly on their creation, an eerie silence filled the air. The aliens were getting closer, and the clock was ticking. Every day brought them closer to the final showdown, but no one in the underground bunker could stop now. They had no choice but to press forward. The fate of humanity depended on it. In that moment, something shifted in the minds of the people working on the warship. It wasn't just about the ship anymore. It was about proving to the world, and to the Zorathians, that humanity was far from defeated. The warship would be their message to the aliens. Humans don't give up. Not ever. As the last pieces of the warship were assembled, the humans couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Could this really work? Could junk be turned into salvation? They had no answers yet, but one thing was clear: this was humanity's final chance, and they would do everything in their power to make it count. A bold plan. The underground base hummed with activity as the human team scrambled to prepare for their most daring mission yet. The warship, though still incomplete, was beginning to take form. Engineers, soldiers, and technicians worked together, welding metal, rerouting wires, and assembling the broken-down parts of old ships. Their determination was unmatched, but so was the scale of the challenge ahead. Commander Sarah Donovan stood in front of the nearly assembled warship, a complex mix of old technology and scavenged materials. It was an impressive sight, but to anyone who didn't understand the bigger picture, it looked like little more than a haphazard pile of metal. To the engineers who were building it, however, it was the key to humanity's survival. Max, the young engineer who had been leading much of the assembly, wiped sweat from his brow as he adjusted a panel on the ship. "It's coming together, but we still have a long way to go. There's no guarantee that any of this will actually work once we try to fly it." Sarah glanced at him, her expression serious but confident. "I know, Max, but we don't have a choice. If we don't make this work, humanity is finished." Her voice was calm, but the weight of the truth hung in the air. Time was running out. The alien forces were already advancing on the last human strongholds. The warship, still untested, was all they had left. Every person in the bunker knew that it would have to be perfect. There was no room for error. "We've got one shot at this," Sarah continued. "If we succeed, we can turn the tide of this war. If we fail, there's nothing left for humanity." Max nodded, his face set in determination. He turned back to the controls. "I'll make sure everything is ready, Commander. We just need a little more time." The team worked in shifts, racing against the clock. Despite the pressure, there was a sense of unity among them. They knew they were fighting not just for survival, but for the future of every person on Earth. The warship wasn't just a weapon. It was a symbol of humanity's resilience. The alien forces, led by the Zorathian warlords, had assumed that once Earth's cities were wiped out, the human race would fall into despair and surrender. They had never expected the survivors to rally. They had never counted on the sheer willpower of the human spirit. But now it was becoming clear to the people in the bunker. They were not going down without a fight. Over the next few days, the warship began to take shape. The team used everything they had. Old weapons were reworked and integrated into the ship's design. Even old communication satellites were scavenged to give the warship the capability to coordinate with other human groups still fighting around the globe. But the most important piece of the puzzle was still missing: a way to power the ship. The Zorathians had technology far beyond what humans could create, and the warship's systems were far from perfect. Yet there was something the humans had that the Zorathians didn't: resourcefulness. Sarah had an idea, one that seemed almost impossible. A team of engineers was assigned to work on a nuclear reactor, using the last remaining fuel sources they could find in the area. It was a dangerous move, but it could be the key to powering the warship. If they could make it work, They'd have enough energy to power not just the ship's engines, but its weapons systems as well. As the warship slowly came to life, a growing sense of hope spread among the humans. Their dream was turning into reality. They weren't just building a ship, they were building a chance to strike back. The humans had been underestimated for too long, but now they were showing the Zorethians that humanity would not simply lie down and die. "Max, how's the reactor coming along?" Sarah asked, her voice steady. Max looked up from the console, his face tired but resolute. "It's going to be a tight fit, Commander. But I think we can make it work. If we get this reactor online, we'll have enough power to launch the ship and fight." "Then let's move," Sarah ordered. "We can't afford to wait. The Zorethians are closing in." The humans didn't waste any time. They knew the risks, but they also knew that they couldn't wait any longer. They had to launch the warship now. The ship, despite being built from scrap and remnants of a destroyed world, was their final hope. As the final components were added, the warship's engines hummed to life, sputtering and crackling like a storm ready to break. The humans had done it. Against all odds, they had created a warship that could fight. The crew gathered in front of the massive ship, eyes wide with disbelief. It was far from perfect, but it was real. And it was their only shot at victory. "All right, everyone," Sarah said, her voice full of authority. "This is it. Our last chance. We're not just fighting for survival anymore. We're fighting to show the universe that humanity can't be beaten." With the warship ready and the aliens only a few days away, there was no turning back. It was time to test their creation. Would it be enough to turn the tide of the war, or would it all come crashing down? The humans didn't know, but they were willing to risk everything to find out. The first steps. The warship stood in the middle of the underground hangar, a symbol of human resilience, but it was still incomplete. Every piece of metal welded together told the story of struggle, sacrifice, and hope. The engineers worked around the clock, tweaking and adjusting systems that had never been designed to function together. Every part of the ship had come from something broken, something discarded. It was a ship made of junk, but it was humanity's last chance to survive. Sarah Donovan stood in front of the warship, watching as the crew continued their work. They were close, but there were still many hurdles ahead. The most important thing now was to test the warship's flight capabilities. The engineers had never designed anything like this before, and though the ship's power systems had come online, there were doubts about whether the ship could actually take off, let alone battle the alien forces. The countdown had begun. The team was ready to launch, but before they could even consider it, they had to face a terrifying reality. The Zorethians were nearing Earth's last strongholds. The warship was their final hope, and if it didn't fly, humanity would be crushed once and for all. Max, the young engineer who had been leading the ship's construction, was particularly anxious. He had worked on the power systems for the warship, making sure the reactor was fully functional. Now he stood next to Sarah, his brow furrowed in concentration. "I think it's ready," Max said, his voice filled with uncertainty. "We've tested the engines, the weapons, but this is the first time we're going to actually fly it. There's no telling what might go wrong." Sarah looked at him, her expression serious but calm. "We've come this far, Max. We can't stop now. We either make this work, or we lose everything." The engineers had spent hours preparing for the flight, checking every system, and making sure nothing was overlooked. The ship was made of parts from old fighter jets, broken-down spaceships, and even decommissioned satellites. The hull was a patchwork of scrap metal, and there were many imperfections, but none of that mattered now. The warship had to fly. The team moved to the cockpit, where Sarah would take control. She had flown many ships in her time, but nothing like this. The control system had been jury-rigged from a variety of old flight controls, and there was no guarantee it would work properly. As Sarah climbed into the pilot's seat, she felt a weight on her shoulders. The fate of humanity rested on her ability to get the warship into the sky and keep it there. "Are we clear for takeoff?" Sarah asked over the comms, her voice steady, though her heart raced. Max's voice crackled through the speaker. "We're ready, Commander. Power levels are stable. Engines are good to go. Just be careful. We're not sure how the ship will handle in the air." Sarah nodded, gripping the controls. She could feel the ship shudder beneath her as she powered up the engines. The warship's massive engines roared to life, sputtering and shaking as though they weren't quite ready for flight. The room around her vibrated with the force of the engines, and she could hear the hum of the reactors powering up. Despite all the noise and the uncertainty, she focused on the task at hand. Outside the hangar, the Zorathians were getting closer. There was no time to waste. She had to fly. With a deep breath, Sarah pushed the throttle forward, and the warship began to rise slowly from the ground. The ship lurched as it took off, its old engines struggling to gain altitude. The vibrations were intense, and the ship's systems groaned under the strain. For a moment, it felt like the whole thing might fall apart mid-air. The engineers on the ground watched in tense silence, hoping they hadn't just built a death trap. "Steady, Commander." Max's voice came through the comms. "Just keep it steady and keep climbing. Don't push it too hard." Sarah's hands gripped the controls tightly, guiding the warship higher. Slowly, the ship began to gain altitude. The shaking lessened, and the loud whine of the engines grew stronger as they steadied. The warship was in the air, and despite its rough appearance, it was holding together. For the first time in years, there was a glimmer of hope. "We've got liftoff," Sarah exclaimed. Her voice was filled with a mixture of relief and disbelief. The team erupted into cheers back at the base. It wasn't perfect, but they had made it into the air. The warship was flying. Now they had to make sure it could stay in the air long enough to reach the alien fleet and fight back. But as Sarah looked out the cockpit windows, a wave of anxiety swept over her. The warship wasn't just a collection of metal scraps. It was humanity's weapon against the Zorathians, and it had to be flawless. The battle for Earth was just beginning. Max's voice interrupted her thoughts. "Commander, we've got a problem. The alien ships are closer than we thought. You've got to get this thing into battle mode now." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She had only a few minutes to prepare for the most dangerous mission of her life. The team had built the warship with weapons capable of firing on the alien fleet, but now it was up to her to make sure they worked. "We're not backing down," Sarah said, her voice firm. "Get ready for battle." With the warship now airborne, they had no more time to waste. They were going to confront the alien forces head-on. The first steps were done, but the true test was just about to begin. Would the warship be enough to defeat the Zorathians, or had humanity's hope been built on a shaky foundation of scrap and desperation? As the warship flew toward the alien fleet, Sarah knew that the next moments would decide the fate of the entire human race, and there was no turning back. Turning junk into power. The warship's engines hummed, barely holding together as Sarah navigated through the skies. The ship had made it this far, but now the real test began. The alien fleet was closing in, and the humans had only a small window to strike before the Zorathians would attack their final stronghold. The warship, built from scraps and salvaged technology, now needed to prove it could survive a battle. Inside the cockpit, Sarah gripped the controls tightly, her eyes scanning the sky. The ship's hull, patched together from pieces of old warships and broken satellites, shook slightly with every movement, but she was no longer worried about the ship falling apart. She had seen it hold up so far. Now it was about to face its real challenge. Max's voice crackled through the comms. "Commander, we've completed the weapon systems. The cannons are operational, but we're still not sure how they'll perform in battle. They were never designed for this kind of use." "I know," Sarah replied, her tone steady. "But we don't have a choice. We've got to make it work." She could feel her pulse racing as she prepared for the most crucial moment. The alien ships were already visible on the horizon. Massive, sleek vessels, far more advanced than anything humanity had ever created. The Zorethians didn't expect humans to have any kind of weapon that could match theirs, especially not something built from nothing but junk. The warship, now high above the Earth, approached the alien fleet. Sarah switched the controls to combat mode, feeling the warship's systems shift into a higher gear. The once imperfect machine was now alive with energy. The power of the reactor hummed through every part of the ship, providing just enough strength to run the heavy weaponry and keep the ship flying. "Enemy ships in range," said one of the gunners. "Ready to fire." Sarah gripped the controls even tighter, sweat beading on her forehead. "Hold steady. Wait for my signal." The warship was approaching the first wave of Zorethian ships. From the outside, it looked like a hodgepodge of various technologies, pieced together in a desperate effort to survive. Its bulky form contrasted sharply with the sleek, high-tech alien ships. But inside, it was ready for war. The guns, though cobbled together from old military weapons, were designed to be powerful enough to do damage if they could land a hit. The first alien ship fired. Its beam cut through the sky, sizzling with an intensity that would have easily destroyed a lesser ship. But the warship held its ground. Sarah slammed her hand down on the fire button, and the cannons on the warship roared to life, releasing a barrage of energy blasts. The beams hit the alien ship, sending shockwaves through its hull. To Sarah's surprise, the shot was successful. Just barely, but it was enough to knock the alien ship off course. "Direct hit," a voice shouted from the back. The crew erupted into cheers, but Sarah remained focused. The fight was far from over. "Stay sharp," Sarah ordered. "This is just the beginning." The warship zigzagged through the sky, evading incoming fire from the alien ships. The weapons, though not the most advanced, were proving effective. The scrap-built ship may not have looked like much, but its unexpected power was starting to turn the tide of the battle. Max's voice came through the comms again. "Commander, we've got a full fleet of Zorethian warships bearing down on us. We need to act fast." Sarah's eyes narrowed as she took in the sight of the enemy ships. There were dozens of them, each one larger and more powerful than the last. The humans were outnumbered and outgunned, but they had one thing the Zorethians hadn't counted on: a ship built from desperation, powered by the hope of a people who had nothing left to lose. "We can't let them take Earth," Sarah muttered under her breath. She adjusted the flight path, diving toward the next wave of alien ships. The warship's cannons fired again, tearing through the alien lines. Sparks flew as the shots landed, damaging the Zorethian ships. But the battle was far from won. A large Zorethian vessel loomed directly ahead. It was heavily armored, with energy shields that could deflect nearly every attack. Sarah knew that the only way to defeat this ship was to get close as possible, and hit it where its shields couldn't protect it. "Brace for impact," Sarah shouted as she steered the warship toward the Zorethian vessel. The crew held on tight as the ship sped toward the alien giant. The warship shuddered as it cut through the air, its weapons firing wildly as it closed in. The Zorethian ship responded with a barrage of fire, but the warship swerved and dodged, narrowly avoiding destruction. At the last possible moment, Sarah pulled the warship into a sharp dive, sending it under the alien ship. She switched to the underbelly cannons, aiming for the vulnerable sections of the Zorethian ship. "Firing now," shouted one of the gunners. The shots rang out, slamming into the bottom of the Zorethian ship. Sparks flew, and the hull cracked open. For the first time, the aliens were stunned. The warship had found a weakness, and exploited it. "We've got it," the gunner shouted. One down. But the battle was far from over. The skies were filled with Zorethian ships, and humanity's warship was still outnumbered. The battle for Earth was now fully engaged, and the humans had no choice but to keep fighting, even if their chances of survival were slim. As Sarah surveyed the chaotic scene, she realized that, despite the odds, the warship, built from the remains of the past, was turning the fight into something that was no longer hopeless. It was the beginning of a new fight, one where humanity wasn't simply surviving but pushing back. And with each successful hit, The crew grew bolder. They weren't just fighting to survive anymore. They were fighting to win. The warship, made of scrap, was more powerful than anyone could have ever imagined, and the humans who had built it were proving that their will to survive was stronger than anything the aliens could throw at them. The first test. The warship, a patchwork of salvaged parts and broken technology, was now in the heart of the battle. Sarah Donovan, gripping the controls with both hands, was pushing the ship to its limits. The Zorathian fleet, despite being larger and more advanced, had started to falter. Humanity's ragtag ship, built from junk and powered by desperation, had managed to land a few critical hits on the enemy. But Sarah knew that the real test was still to come. "We've got another wave coming in." Max's voice crackled over the comms. "They're not backing down. The Zorathian fleet is regrouping for a counterattack." Sarah's heart raced. The warship had held up well under fire, but this was a battle for survival, and the ship was still far from perfect. The alien ships were stronger and better equipped. It had been a miracle that they were still in the fight, but that wouldn't last forever. Humanity needed to make a stand now. "How's our power?" Sarah asked, keeping her eyes on the radar screen. "Can we keep this up?" Max responded, his voice tight. "We've got enough energy for a few more rounds of fire, but the reactor's starting to strain. We need to finish this soon, or we'll lose power." Sarah nodded, her grip tightening on the controls. The ship had been built on a shoestring budget, with spare parts and scraps from old machines. The reactor, though functional, wasn't designed to run at full capacity for extended periods of time. And now it was showing signs of stress. They couldn't afford to wait much longer. "Understood," she said. "We finish this now." The warship dipped and dodged, narrowly avoiding a series of blasts from the approaching Zorathian ships. Sarah's eyes scanned the fleet ahead. There were at least 5 large warships, each with heavily armored hulls. The ship's shields were nearly impenetrable, and their firepower was devastating. But what they didn't have was the unpredictability of humanity's scrap-built warship. The humans might not have had the most advanced technology, but they had something that the aliens didn't: ingenuity. "Commander," one of the gunners shouted, "we've locked onto a weak point in their formation. There's an opening in the center ship's shield. If we hit it just right, we could break through." Sarah gritted her teeth. This was the moment they had been waiting for, the chance to deal a critical blow to the heart of the Zorathian fleet. But the risk was huge. They had to get in close, closer than they ever had before, and hope that their patched-together ship could withstand the alien counterfire. "We're going in," Sarah said, her voice firm. With a sharp turn, the warship dove toward the Zorathian ships. The ship shuddered under the strain, the hull creaking with every maneuver. Sarah could feel the power of the engines pushing them forward, the vibrations increasing with each second. But there was no turning back now. This was their best shot. Max's voice echoed over the comms again, urgently warning, "Commander, the reactor's running hot. If we push too hard, we could overheat." "I know, Max," Sarah replied, "but we can't stop now." As the warship neared the Zorathian fleet, the alien ships opened fire. Blasts of energy streaked through the sky, but Sarah was quick to evade. The warship danced between explosions, dodging beam after beam, narrowly missing death with each turn. The crew held their breath as Sarah's eyes locked on the target. The weak point in the Zorathian ship's shield was coming into view. The ship's systems hummed as she lined up the shot, her fingers ready to pull the trigger. The pressure was immense. If she missed, they might not get another chance. The alien ship's shields flickered for a brief moment, just enough for the warship to take its shot. "Now," Sarah shouted. She pressed the fire button, and the warship's cannons erupted with a thunderous roar. The energy blast slammed into the weak point in the Zorathian ship's shields, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then, as the blasts made contact, a massive explosion rocked the alien ship. The shields failed, and the ship's hull was torn apart, sending debris flying into the air. "We've done it," The gunners shouted in unison. But the victory was short-lived. The remaining Zorathian ships were closing in fast. The battle wasn't over yet. Sarah quickly adjusted course, pulling the warship into a sharp climb to avoid incoming fire. They had scored a major hit, but the alien fleet was regrouping, and they were still outnumbered. "Keep firing. Don't let up," Sarah ordered, determination in her voice. The warship fired relentlessly, blasting through the Zorathian defenses. Despite the ship's imperfections and the challenges it faced, humanity's warship was holding its own. The crew, fighting as one, was pushing the alien invaders back. But as Sarah continued to pilot the warship, the strain on the reactor became more evident. The power was flickering, and every move felt like a gamble. She could see it in Max's face as he watched the power systems struggling to keep up. They didn't have much time left before the warship would be unable to function. "We need to finish this now," Sarah shouted. "Give me one more round of fire. Full power." Max hesitated for a brief moment. "Commander, if we go full power, the reactor will overload. We won't be able to make it back." Sarah didn't hesitate. "We have no choice." With everything they had left, the warship launched a final devastating barrage of fire at the remaining Zorathian ships. The shots hit their targets with incredible force, tearing through enemy hulls and causing massive explosions. The warship shook violently, and for a moment, Sarah wondered if they had pushed too far. But then, the Zorathian fleet started to break apart. One ship after another fell from the sky, leaving a trail of wreckage behind. The once imposing fleet of alien invaders was now in disarray, scattered across the sky like pieces of a broken puzzle. For the first time in years, humanity had gained a clear victory. The warship, though patched together from scraps, had proven its worth. It had taken on the most advanced alien fleet in the galaxy, and won. As Sarah looked out at the burning wreckage of the alien ships, a wave of exhaustion washed over her. They had done it. They had won. But as the warship limped back toward Earth, its systems failing, Sarah knew that this battle was just the beginning. The war was far from over, but humanity had shown the Zorathians that they were far from beaten. And the fight would continue as long as there was hope. Battle for Earth. The warship, though battered and barely holding together, had won its first major victory against the Zorathians. But the battle was far from over. Sarah Donovan knew that the real test had just begun. With their victory in the skies, the human forces had earned a brief respite. But it wouldn't last long. The Zorathians would regroup, and humanity's makeshift warship, built from scraps, could only withstand so much. As the warship made its way back toward Earth, Sarah could see the distant outline of the remaining Zorathian fleet, retreating but not defeated. They were already sending reinforcements. The alien invaders might have underestimated humanity once, but they would not make that mistake again. "Commander, we've got more ships on the radar," Max reported from the control room. "The Zorathians are regrouping and bringing in their largest reinforcements. We'll need to act fast if we want to stop them before they reach Earth." Sarah's heart sank. Earth's cities were already devastated, and what little was left of humanity's defenses had been overwhelmed in the previous battles. The warship had become humanity's last hope. They had one chance to stop the Zorathians from completely annihilating Earth, and if this mission failed, humanity would not get a second chance. "We can't let them reach the planet," Sarah said, determination in her voice. "All forces, prepare for another fight. The warship might not hold up much longer, but we have to give everything we've got." The crew, exhausted but resolute, made the final preparations. They had seen how close they were to victory. Now, they just had to push through. "Ready the weapons," Sarah continued. "If we go down, we're going down fighting." With the warship's systems pushed to their limit, Sarah took the controls once again, maneuvering the ship toward the incoming alien fleet. The warship's reactors were strained, its hull cracked and scorched, but it was still alive, and that was all that mattered. As they approached the Zorathian fleet, The human warship's weapons came to life. Each shot from the cannons echoed through the ship, creating a deafening roar as they fired on the alien ships. The Zorathians responded immediately, unleashing a barrage of firepower that sent shockwaves through the air. The warship jolted, its systems flickering as it absorbed the alien blasts. Max's voice crackled through the comms, his tone urgent. "Commander, the hull is taking too much damage. We're barely holding together." Sarah gritted her teeth. "We don't have time for that. Keep firing." The warship surged forward, dodging incoming beams, and fired a series of shots aimed directly at the heart of the Zorathian fleet. Each shot found its mark, and the explosions rocked the alien ships, sending debris flying. The Zorathians, caught off guard by the tenacity of the human warship, were beginning to lose ground. But as the battle raged on, Sarah could see the numbers were working against them. The Zorathians' forces were vast, and despite their heavy losses, they kept coming. The warship was holding its own, but for how long? "We need to take down their flagship," Sarah said, her voice low but commanding. "If we can cripple their command ship, the rest of their fleet will scatter." Max nodded. "We've located the flagship's weak point. It's heavily shielded, but if we can get close, we might be able to hit it hard enough to break through." "We'll get close," Sarah said, determination setting in. "Prepare the final assault." With the Zorathian flagship in their sights, the warship dove straight into the heart of the enemy fleet. The alien ships fired relentlessly, but Sarah weaved and dodged, pushing the warship to its absolute limit. The ship groaned under the strain, its systems flashing red, but it held steady. "Hold on," Sarah shouted, her hands tightly gripping the controls. The warship shot forward, its guns firing relentlessly at the Zorathian flagship, hitting its shields and tearing them apart. The enemy flagship fired one last devastating beam, aimed directly at the warship. The ship shuddered violently, and for a moment, it seemed as though the warship might break apart. But then, just as the Zorathian flagship's shields flickered, the final barrage from the warship's cannons slammed into the enemy vessel. The flagship's hull cracked open, and an enormous explosion erupted from within. The Zorathian fleet faltered. The loss of their flagship sent shockwaves through their forces, and the remaining ships began to retreat. The warship, despite all odds, had done the impossible. The tide of the battle had turned. Sarah watched the alien fleet scatter, their remaining ships fleeing into deep space. Humanity had just won a decisive victory. They had stopped the Zorathians from taking Earth, and the warship, made from nothing but scraps, had become the symbol of humanity's unyielding will. The crew aboard the warship let out a collective sigh of relief. They were battered, exhausted, and their ship was barely functional. But they had won. Against all odds, humanity had fought back and shown the Zorathians that they would never be defeated. But as Sarah looked out into space, her mind turned to the future. The Zorathians were not completely gone, and they would likely regroup for another attack. The war was not over. "We've won this battle," Sarah said, her voice calm but determined. "But there's still more to fight for. Earth is safe, for now, but we need to rebuild and prepare for whatever comes next." With the alien fleet retreating into the void, the warship limped back toward Earth, its crew exhausted but victorious. Humanity had faced its darkest hour, and against all odds, it had emerged victorious. But the war for Earth was far from over, and the next chapter of the struggle had already begun. Victory and hope. As the warship limped back toward Earth, its battered hull creaking under the strain, Sarah Donovan couldn't help but reflect on what had just transpired. The battle had been fierce, and their victory had come at a heavy cost. The warship, made from scraps of old war machines and salvaged technology, had proven its worth beyond anything anyone had expected. But the ship wasn't invincible, and neither were they. Humanity had barely held on to its last thread of hope, but that thread had proven to be stronger than anyone could have imagined. The warship's systems were failing, its reactors sputtering, and the once gleaming hull was now scorched and broken. But as the crew looked at the debris from the retreating Zorathian fleet, a wave of relief washed over them. They had done the impossible. They had stopped the Zorathians from taking Earth, and humanity still had a chance. "Commander, we've won," Max said, his voice tired but filled with gratitude. "The fleet is in retreat. We've done it." Sarah nodded, though her mind was already racing ahead. The warship had been an incredible victory, but the fight was far from over. The Zorathians would regroup, and they would come back stronger. Humanity needed to rebuild, to come together and prepare for the next battle. But for now, Earth was safe. "We've done more than just survive," Sarah said, looking at her crew. "We've shown the universe that humanity can fight back, and we'll keep fighting until this war is over." The crew aboard the warship gathered, their faces grim but hopeful. They had risked everything for this moment, and now that victory was within their grasp, they knew they had to take the next steps. The warship, though a miracle, wasn't enough on its own. The survivors needed to rally, to rebuild Earth's defenses, and prepare for whatever the Zorathians had planned next. Back at the base, messages had already been sent to the remaining human colonies around the globe. The resistance leaders were calling for unity. Earth's cities may have been destroyed, but the will of humanity was unbreakable. People had seen the power of the warship, and they were inspired. It wasn't just the ship that had saved them. It was the ingenuity, the determination, and the spirit of the people who had built it. As the warship finally touched down on Earth's surface, Sarah looked out at the horizon. The planet was scared from the battle, but there was something new in the air: hope. For the first time in years, humanity had a future worth fighting for. The Zorathians had underestimated the human race, believing it was a species destined for extinction. But the warship had proven them wrong. "We've won the first battle," Sarah said to her crew. "But we're not done. We've got a world to rebuild, and there's a lot more work ahead of us." Max, who had been by her side throughout the whole ordeal, looked at her with quiet admiration. "Do you really think we can win the whole war?" Sarah's eyes shone with a fire that had never gone out, even in the darkest moments of the war. "We just proved that anything is possible. We'll rebuild, we'll prepare, and when they come back, we'll be ready." The warship, though it had served as humanity's last hope, had become something more. It was now a symbol of what humans were capable of when they refused to give up. It had started as a desperate, almost impossible project, and now it was the key to a brighter future. As the crew disembarked from the ship, they were greeted by cheers from the survivors who had witnessed the battle from Earth's surface. The victory was theirs, but the journey wasn't over. It was just the beginning. "We're not done yet," Sarah said as she stood tall in front of the crew. "This is just the first step. We've shown the universe what humanity is capable of, and we'll keep showing them, again and again, until Earth is safe." And so, despite the odds, despite the overwhelming forces against them, humanity stood tall. The Zorathians had come to conquer Earth, believing that humans were weak and insignificant. But they had been wrong. Humanity had proven that even in their darkest hour, they would fight with everything they had. They had built a warship from scraps, and that warship had changed the course of the war. As the survivors looked to the future, they knew that more battles lay ahead. The Zorathians would return, and Earth would face more challenges. But for the first time in a long while, humanity had something the Zorathians could never take away: hope. And with that hope, they would keep fighting, keep building, and keep striving for victory, no matter what came next.